This is George Hooper. We're with Upside Down Church. Today, we're having a conversation with Rachel Gibson, who is an LCSW. We'll talk about what that means and the work that you do. And we'll also be hearing from a colleague who's part of our cooperative parish, Matt Hambrick. And by the way, the day we're recording this, it's his birthday, so happy birthday, Matt.
Happy
Uh,
birthday.
and so we'll just dive right into it. And Rachel, if you would tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do.
As George said, my name is Rachel. I am part of Westwood United Methodist Church in West Los Angeles. I've been there for 30 years this year. At the beginning as a pastor's kid, my mom was appointed there, and now I am fortunate enough to attend with my husband and three kids. I love being part of that community, and having been there for so long has been an amazing gift in my life. I am also a therapist. My credentials, my license is a licensed clinical social worker, or LCSW, which means that I have training in clinical individual skills, but with the backdrop or context of cultural and systemic structures. So my framework is always like person in context, and understanding that all of us exist in connection and relationship with each other, with structures, with power, and trying to figure out the most healthy ways of navigating that while maintaining a sense of values and purpose along the way.
We were having a conversation a few weeks ago, and you shared with me one of the things that you find. We're obviously not going to be asking you to reveal things about your clients, but generally
Because
speaking,
I won't.
generally speaking, um, what you found kind of a running theme with folks who with whom you meet and who you meet in the world about the needs where there is. You talk about those structures and where there is a brokenness in the structures, where there is something that just isn't working. And would you share with us about that?
Yeah, so I work mainly with millennials. I am an elder millennial, so I'm like the oldest millennial that you can be. And I really love working with millennials, partly because it's sort of the first generation where mental health is seen as just like another way that you take care of yourself. Like there's a commitment to it, and a genuine curiosity and desire to know more about oneself that is, I think, sort of the first generation where that's just sort of part of how we take care of ourselves. So it's a population that I really love. It's also a population that I think is uniquely struggling. It might turn out to not be unique in that it might continue on into later generations, but I do think there's a unique pressure and lostness. I know that's not phrased great, but um, it feels like the systems have sort of stopped working as well for millennials. And that has created mental health struggles. And I'm classifying them as mental health struggles because of it causes depression, anxiety. But I also want to be clear that I think that those are reasonable reactions to the struggles. I don't want to pathologize those reactions. I think they make a lot of sense. Nevertheless, it's not what we want for ourselves. So, what I'm seeing in the people that I work with, I'm seeing overwhelming loneliness. Um, I'm seeing a lot of feelings of being disconnected from each other. And I think that was obviously worsened with COVID, and at least half, maybe more than half of my clients did not return to the office. Like they now work from home permanently, and a lot of that is really good. And it also furthers that feeling of disconnection. Um, these are adults that find it hard to make friends, find it hard to find a romantic partner, find it hard to find like-minded people, find it hard to create support systems for themselves. I'm in Los Angeles. Most people here are not from here. And there's just this feeling of being disconnected, floating, doing your best, trying to nail down a sense of purpose, a sense of values, but finding it really hard to do that in isolation from each other.
How can that be when we have all these means of communication,
Isn't it
when we
wild?
have the internet?
Yep. Yeah. Turns out not actually that great for mental health. Yeah, it has created a I don't okay. Everything I'm going to say, I will argue with myself because I have ADHD and that's just how my brain works. So, like, on the one hand, listen, the internet can bring together amazing connections. Like, it's amazing. And there that you can have support systems that you would not ordinarily have and meet people and find interests and like it's great. And at the same time, it amplifies the very human feeling of I'm not doing enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Everyone else has it figured out, and I don't. Like it amplifies those feelings so much to the point that it can be really damaging to your mental health to consistently be comparing yourself to what we forget is a very constructed public image on the internet. And I attribute this quote to Oprah. I think it's Oprah. Maybe I made that up, but I'm going with Oprah that never compare your insides to someone else's outsides.
Mhm.
And like that's what we're doing with social media is we're like my life is a mess. I don't know what I'm doing. My house is messy. My kids are misbehaving. I'm overwhelmed. And I go online and like everyone's standing in their gorgeous, clean homes with their cute kids smiling. And what is wrong with me? How come everyone else is? But guess what? They're just as messy. Like that's the secret that I can tell you as a therapist. Everyone's a mess. I'm a mess. Everyone's a mess. But we don't have connections deep enough to reveal that to each other so that we can know and sit with each other in that messiness.
It's funny that you say, I heard you say that you're the youngest or the oldest millennial. I'm the youngest Gen Xer.
I'm married to the young Gen Xer, so
There
yeah,
you
we talk
go.
about that a lot.
And I've noticed something as I've been trying to, aren't we all dissecting sociologically our world in front of us? I'm noticing with my own generation, I'm trying to pay more attention to it, that we're kind of the first generation to reject institutional solutions for friend finding, for example.
Yep.
Institutional solutions for anything, really.
Yeah.
We were kind of the original, like we were disruptors because we just opted out of a million things. For example, like what's the Lions Club doing now? Like it's perfect timing for the Gen X to take over the Lions Club. It's
right.
just like most institutions, it's done. I've also witnessed like whereas like I hear you talking about these millennial folks, and I think that's my experience with my own church, which is a fairly millennial church or older Gen Z. I noticed they're like really looking for connection. Millennials, Gen Z, they're looking for connection. They're looking for opportunities, friend finding, and on and on. But Gen Xers, a lot of us have just become comfortable with loneliness.
Yeah.
And like just alienation as a lifestyle.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that's something you've seen as well.
That is something that I've seen. I think I would, although I agree with what you're saying, if I were the therapist of a person saying I've gotten comfortable with loneliness, I would challenge that because I think it can be more comfortable, it can be safer, but I often think that it's rooted in pain. It's rooted in the pain of distrust of structures or broken relationships that have not been able to be repaired. Like it's unlikely to me that it really is fine, but I know it feels fine. Like, and it can
More,
be easier in the
more
short
becoming
term.
accustomed to this
Yes,
and learning how to
absolutely.
operate with it. And isn't that one of the defining marks of Gen X is that they've just been forgotten? when they list the
Yes.
generations and Gen
They
X doesn't
skip
get
it.
listed there. Yeah,
We
it's
Gen
were
X
latchkey
doesn't-
kids, right? Like we're the
Yes.
generation of latchkey kids. Like we came
Yeah.
home to nobody. We stayed with
Yeah.
nobody.
Right.
We played in the yard. We drank
TV
from the hose. Like we are like
Yeah,
we
the
were like
advertisement,
feral
like,
and
do you know where it's 10 o'clock? Do you know where your
no,
children
no, they do not know where we are.
I have kids. I forgot.
Matt, what struck me, and the reason that I asked Rachel to be with us is when you talk about Lions Club, I mean, certainly it's the church as well. Rachel was talking and saying that when she has folks who are talking about not having this connection and yearning for this connection and feeling this loneliness and not having that place to call home, not that place to be. And that I think what she said to me was that you just wanted to shout, "There's the church that's just there."
Yeah.
And so it's like, and on the other hand, a lot of folks in the church are saying, why can't we get these folks who were here? And
Totally.
and the danger, of course, is that as soon as somebody shows up at the door there, we're like vampires jumping on them, trying to suck the life out of them. And so that's a scary thing as well. Or those who want young people to be there to move the tables around. And they should do what we did when we were. So there is a disconnect, and it's a disconnect on both sides. There's a yearning certainly within the church for people to be able to share what we have. There's also that yearning to have that connection in that community. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was how do we bridge that?
That's a big question that I'm not sure I totally have the answer to. But, the observation that I have in my own life, and, I'm not a Christian therapist, so that's not a framework that I use. I am always happy to talk about religion with clients, but I don't bring it into the room. And like I would assume that most of my clients aren't aware that I attend church or that I was raised by two pastors. So it's not a solution that I bring in, and usually religion is brought into the room as something that needs to be recovered from. It's brought in as a trauma. And that's normally how I interface with religion as a therapist. And although I will list sort of religious institutions as possibilities amongst other possibilities of places to go, I think the fact that I am somewhat hesitant and I feel I have to give a lot of like caveats if I were to suggest church shows that there's a real messaging problem. Like like I don't know what the solution is because there's a lot of church trauma, there's a lot of religious trauma, there's a lot of assumptions made about what it means to be religious or what it means to attend church. And a lot of it's really fair. Like it's not fair to the congregations that are affirming and that are inclusive and welcoming, but like it's fair about Christianity as a whole. And so how do we like, I don't know, I don't want to make it sound like advertising because that doesn't feel right either. But what I see is people who want community, support system, a sense of purpose, and like connection. And I've experienced all of those things in the church. And I do feel like what's missing that they are not finding the church to be a viable option. That it's not occurring to them that like church might be a place amongst many where I could engage in that kind of community and connection.
See, I feel like you're reading my mail in some ways of my own story because
Yeah.
I grew up in a very opposite religious experience to what you described.
Yeah.
Traumatic, like very legalistic, very anti-LGBTQIA, like very anti-women, like kind of hates women. And my daughter was born, and I was like, I can't be a part of this.
Oh, yeah.
Like, or my daughter was in utero, I should say, and I was like, I can't be a part of this.
Yeah.
So I love hearing a counter narrative to that because I think my natural is like just to be like,
Sure.
yeah, we're a mess. Why would we offer this? Why would we like, let's just focus on like the quiet obedience that is the best version of Christianity that we see, I think anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Just one piece, like I think also, you can't just throw a dartboard at Christianity in America and think that it's going to be a healthy place to be. Like if you put Christianity in America in a blender, it comes out poison.
That's a great line. Yeah.
Um, it's gross. It's
Yeah.
disgusting, actually, as a whole.
Yeah.
We have these pockets of beauty all over the place. Those pockets of beauty are often full of gray hair.
Yeah.
Um, I actually, you know what? We were having a meeting at the church the other day about like we want to be like this. I serve two churches. One is very, very young. One is not so young. So this was a not so young church, and they were asking me, Pastor, like, what do we do to get 35-year-olds in? And I was like, okay, can we just turn it around just for a second? Just for a second. We're all over 60 here except for me. Like we're all, I don't think I'm telling it, like we're all over 60. Friends, if you showed up to a church that was all under 35, no one over 35, definitely no one over 60, and they have a band, are you staying?
Yeah.
They said, absolutely not. I'm like, why do you expect a 35-year-old to step into your space where everyone's over 60 and has classical music?
Yeah.
Like, why would you expect that? So like all these beautiful spaces I think that you describe, or most of the beautiful spaces you describe, are so culturally like unfriendly in that, like in a way that says like my people aren't here because this is my, not even my parents' generation. This is my grandparents' generation here.
Mm-hmm. I think that's, I think it's true that we are drawn to churches that look like us, that's it, all of us, of course, like immediately judge a church when we walk in because we're humans and that's what our brains do. And I think you're right that like that would certainly be something that could give people pause walking in and seeing like, okay, no one is my age. This isn't really my vibe. But I will also say that I'm a there's so much richness in uh, in communities that contain all generations, and I think that there's opportunities to lean into that richness very intentionally with, like I said, people that are in Los Angeles, they're not from here, so they don't have grandparents to love on their babies all the time. They don't have like a seasoned mom to be like, it gets better. Let me hold that baby. Just go take a walk around the block. I promise you that it will be easier. Like they don't have that built into their social structure. Like in a lot of other places, you can walk, you can get help, you can get family to love on your kids. And that was one of the richest parts of raising my kids in this church where I was a kid, is there was never a shortage of a multitude of ages of people just ready to love my kids and ready to embrace them and correct them if they're running around wild and like help me to raise them. And so I think like, yes, thinking about what messages younger people get when they walk into your church is really important, but also recognizing that that's a missing piece for a lot of people too, and a very genuine opportunity for the kind of connection and support that I think people are really craving. Both generations are really craving.
See, Matt, it went exactly where you were talking about because you had a question you wanted to raise up, and that was specifically about mentoring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like honestly, in a lot of ways, I see my generation as being like I'm the youngest end of it, so I'm gonna like shirk some responsibility. And I am still in the church, but my generation didn't stay. We're gone.
Yeah.
We're completely gone. Like almost completely gone. Our Gen Xers are gone. We were the first generation to be allowed to not go to church once we were like 13.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't stay. The second we could not stay, we didn't stay. And so there's a huge gap in terms of mentoring that I see. We don't have like usually we need somebody about 10 years ahead of us to show us the way. My mentor actually is Gen X, like the one who brought me into ministry is Gen X and just about 10 years older than me. It takes that person about 10 years older than us to say, okay, they're close enough.
Right. They still get it.
They're close enough that I can see it. I don't see myself as a grandparent yet. I mean, I have a 16-year-old daughter. I don't quite see myself as a grandparent yet. At least not a grandparent of 45-year-olds. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I am 45, so like
Yeah.
you can't quite get that mentoring relationship there in the same way. They can love, support you. They can't quite show you what's next. They can show you way down the line.
Mhm.
So having Gen X gone just feels it's a huge task to overcome.
Yeah.
But we're gone.
Yeah. I hear you, and I totally agree with like the the necessity of all the generations, um that any generation that's missing will be felt, that is a loss. And I also agree with you that Gen X is a particularly tricky generation to get pulled back in. I totally agree that, boy, the cynicism, like the disillusionment, and I mean, and I get that too. I mean, my relationship with the church has been all over the place in my lifetime, and I'm sure will be. But but I did stick with it in a way that isn't really typical of my generation either, if I'm honest, but is certainly not typical of Gen Xers. And I think I don't know that I'm really giving advice. I'm thinking about this sort of for the first time, but I think zeroing in on what the community can be, rather than sort of the specific religious beliefs that you must adhere to in order to attend, which I think is what is assumed about churches, is that, if you don't already share these beliefs, it's not really a place for you. Whereas I see church as a healthy way to explore beliefs and to clarify what resonates with you, what doesn't, um, question, challenge. Like it's I think church at its healthiest is a place where it's okay to show up not believing or not knowing what you believe, as long as you're interested in exploring or having those conversations. And that in the meantime, you are able to clarify your own story. You're able to hear your own responses, your own stories, connect with other people. And I I'm arguing with myself in my own head, because it's like I don't want to take the church out of church. That is not my intention. That would be a loss. But I think not we are not good at communicating the parts of church that are not religion, the parts of church that are all the other factors that can bring so much into your life. I don't know if that would appeal to Gen Xers, but I think it's important to be part of the conversation when we're talking about what church does for people.
How does your faith inform your work?
My faith is my I feel like my faith informs everything I mean, most things, everything in my life. I think that the fundamental thing that my faith informs is this sense of connectedness and shared experience. Um, I am constantly astounded and also not astounded at the ways that humans uh, are living such similar experiences, even while being in such different circumstances. Like, it's not that what we are going through is necessarily the same or even similar, but our responses, our humanness, our feelings and our struggles, they are very shared. They are very universal. And that's something that to me feels connected to my faith, in that I believe in leaning in and sharing struggles and burdens with other people. I believe in showing up to sit with someone while they're in the middle of a mess. Like, not that you have to know how to get them out of the mess, but you do need to be willing to climb in and sit next to them in the mess. That to me feels very faith-based. The belief that all humans are of sacred value, and anyone that I speak to, anyone that I speak about, I want to interact with them and treat them and respond to them in ways that honor that value and that like sacredness and miracle of being. So those are the ways that my faith and my upbringing informs my work. And I also, even though it's not religious in the way we talk about it, a lot of the work I do is helping people explore and define their sense of personal values, like who they are and what is important to them, and then talking about how to use those values to move closer to an alignment that feels resonant and feels like it adds depth and purpose to their life. And even though there's usually no discussion of religion or God or spirituality, that process to me feels very spirit-led, because what's fascinating to me is that everyone does have this sense of knowing what is important to them. I mean, we'll go through a list of values and people can say like, yeah, that one's important, that one's not so important, that one's important. Like there is something intrinsic and internal within us that guides us. And for me, that might feel like the spirit or like God. For my clients, it might just be sort of an internal morality, or it's just a sense of pull and push. And I don't think the labeling of it is very important, but that process to me always feels so outside of ourselves because it's something that exists outside of our human understanding, that we just have this internal sense of who we are and what's important. And I think that is also a process that for me, because of my own framework, feels spiritual in nature, even though that's not the framework that I'm using with clients.
I keep coming back to this idea of like, especially as you talk about the individual, that in this isolation, it's like the self turning in on the self, but like it's like looking through the mirror darkly, as we might say. Can you say a little bit about what that looks like as someone's exploring their values, especially when they kind of touch on a trauma point relating to religion?
I think those are slightly different conversations. I think not unrelated, but I think that like most of the work that I do when there is sort of a trauma point with religion is going through a grief process. So first it's acknowledging the harm that's been done and allowing that to just be true. Like we're not debating that, arguing it, it's true. And allowing a grief process for what is lost because of that trauma, both in terms of community and relationships and the church, but also a belief system. I mean, it is scary to let go of a belief system that you have believed your whole life, or at least been told is true. And then you feel unmoored, you feel unanchored in life. And that is one of the last vestiges to go, is sort of that internal belief structure. And even when someone is disconnected from the church, they are often unknowingly holding on to beliefs that they were handed from a toxic or unhealthy church. And it's scary to let go of those last belief structures that are sort of keeping you, making the world feel ordered and understood. So what can help with letting go of those unhealthy belief structures is empowering someone to identify what they really believe. Like if it's not that, and usually, I mean, if they're talking to me about it, it's because I do believe this, or it does keep forming who I am, but I don't like that. I don't believe that logically. And what do? It keeps coming up. Well, then let's talk about what you do believe. And that's a really scary step, or even sometimes like a blasphemous step for somebody who was raised in a church that was very sort of prescriptive about what you are meant to believe. For me to ask them, well, what do you believe? Is like, I have absolutely no idea. I believe what I've been told. But this process of identifying values is a way of like acknowledging that no, you have beliefs. You have a compass, a framework that exists within yourself that you might not have the words for. You might not have sort of formally identified these internal values, but they're there. And it does take healing trauma and intentionally and terrifyingly letting go of those previous beliefs to free you up to like open your hands to the new possibilities, to the new beliefs that you want to claim because they do represent who you are rather than the old beliefs that keep you from who you are.
This is a lot of people that I like. What you're describing are a lot of people that I work with in the millennial and Gen Z category.
Yeah.
It's interesting enough, one of the most difficult things to release in terms of like that traumatic theology is
Mhm.
hell. The
Yeah.
fear of hell like keeps people up long after they've released it intellectually.
Yeah.
So I hear that in the way you're describing, like there's like this thing just still, they don't even believe it. So like
Mhm. Right.
here it
Intellectually.
is, it's eating them alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And like what's wonderful about like therapy and this sort of self-exploration is it's okay that like we can't control our thoughts and our feelings. And that's something that I make clear always on the very first session because when I talk about what goals people have, inevitably like being happier is one of the goals. And I always have to break the bad news that like I can't do that. I can't make you happier, and you can't really make you happier. What we can do is allow you access, like free up some access to happiness, so that when you are happy, because you will be happy, you can lean into it and savor it and notice it and really allow it to fill you and you can celebrate it. And also you're going to free yourself up for sadness and frustration and anger. And just we are humans and we feel a lot of things and they come and go. And the best we can do is like giving you the opportunity to experience these things because what a rich life that creates. And I think the thoughts that are really grabby, like hell, like any of the structures that we don't intellectually believe anymore, we can't make them stop grabbing us, but we can allow them to exist and still make a choice about what we believe. And I think there's a freedom there that people can overcomplicate, like to say, well, I have to make that thought stop. I have to stop. I don't want that thought to be there. Sure, there's a lot of thoughts I don't want in my head. Like half of them I really prefer are not there. But it's okay. You don't have to fight with that thought. You can have the thought that hell exists and choose a different belief. And over time, your brain will stop giving you the hell thought and will start giving you the new belief thought. And at the very worst, it'll play in the background like a song at a grocery store. It doesn't have to be the thing that directs you. It can be the thing that you notice and then you turn towards, yep, that's still there. And here's what I believe to be true for me. And of course, it's difficult. Like, I don't mean to be like, that's all it is. That's it. It's obviously incredibly challenging and time consuming to do that, but worthwhile and takes the pressure off of people of feeling like they have to stop what they did believe or what comes up without their consent. It's like, that's okay. That can happen. And you can still be who you are and focus on what nourishes you.
the like vulnerably sharing our individual stories and collective story together somehow fortifies the thing within us that frees us for a different kind of a life. for a different, like the different kind of faithfulness. Like when you say like church is the answer, like that's what comes up for me is like this. Man, like being in church with grandma really matters.
Yeah.
She has been there.
Yeah.
She has experienced grief. She's experienced loss. She's experienced joys we don't know yet.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and like we're like comparing it to a therapeutic relationship, that's not really what I'm doing, but like there is something about that community and that connection and seeing the long obedience lived in a different kind of way actually opens us up. At least that's what's developing in this conversation.
Yeah. That resonates with me absolutely. And I think there is I think it is a similar process, like that kind of vulnerable storytelling. That is a very similar process to what happens in a therapeutic relationship. And this idea of kind of that quite, that obedience, that long-term obedience. Obviously, there's different language for it in therapy, but it's that long-term commitment to choosing yourself, to choosing the hard thing, choosing to step toward values rather than avoid. Like there's so many choices that are made that no one choice is a make or break, but it's just that consistent commitment to making yourself available to the fullness of life. And I absolutely have found that in church relationships. I mean, I think even just kind of reflecting on like witnessing the way that we care for each other, and there's no one who can care, like practically care for each other the way that older women in the church can. I mean, like I want to be that when I have time to bake more casseroles. Like that is what I want for myself. I want to be an old woman in the church who hears that someone is in the hospital and just knows what to do. Like just steps into action and like shows up, because I have been visiting people in the hospital. I've been caring for families with sick and dying loved ones for decades. And that's a way that I can, like, I want that for myself. And I've witnessed that. And I think there is this shared, like, we can free ourselves up for those experiences by being together, like by watching someone else fill that role, knowing that someday we can step into it. I should send you, I have a handout that is using a storm analogy. It's a technique called dropping anchor. And it's very similar in that, like, if you're in a boat and there's a storm approaching, it is not a good use of your time to like yell at the storm or like to try to stop the storm or like to hide under the deck and pretend that there's no storm. Like none of these things are, like, you can do them, it's fine, but it's just not a great use of your energy. And going back to values, instead dropping your anchor so that you have a moment. And I think dropping your anchor, as I work with clients, it's into, a sense of values, a sense of who am I and how am I going to respond to this incoming storm. I think you can drop your anchor into faith. You can drop your anchor into family, into so many different ways that you can drop this anchor to anchor yourself so that you can take the moment. And the process that I describe is starting with like just checking in with yourself, how you're feeling, what are the thoughts and feelings that you have, broadening it to what's happening in my body, and remembering that those thoughts and feelings exist within a body that you control. So even though we don't control the thoughts and feelings, we do control ourselves. We control literally what we do with like these puppet arms and legs. And then broadening it once more to say, okay, so my thoughts and feelings exist within my body, and my body exists within this context. I'm on this ship and there's a storm coming. What is the next move that I can make that is towards a value or towards the person I want to be, or towards the community I want to support, or towards the element that I want to prioritize? Like just the next step, the next best step that I can take in this situation, recognizing that the storm's coming regardless of what I do. I can't change that. And so that's an analogy that I use quite a bit. And dropping anchor is something that you can do a million times throughout the day, where you just like plunk it down and take a moment to feel connected, feel grounded, and feel yourself before then broadening that lens and making a choice.
If you were able to write an article, let's say you just could write an article right now for all those folks, how would you describe it with nuance?
And I think that the biggest part is finding the right church. And it's tough for me to even verbalize, because I have a super clear understanding of what the right church is for me. But I also don't want to sit in judgment. I do a little bit want to sit in judgment. So this is where I run into trouble, because I'm like, I think there's a couple of things going on. So one is overcoming the baggage that comes with the word church. So if I were to suggest, and as I said, I will include church on like a list of suggestions, but I'm not endorsing all churches. I'm not saying, you know what the solution is? Christianity. Like, that's not a complete representation of what I'm suggesting. And so I think the biggest initial hurdle is defining what it is that I would even be suggesting. And it would be a church that is inclusive, that has done the work to reject the kind of toxicity of what I think is old and, I want to say, irrelevant. I'm trying not to be like so openly hostile towards differing belief systems, but just less useful, less healthy, less inclusive, less affirming churches. That's not what I mean, because I am hoping to point people toward a church where there's room, just where there's space for how you show up. And I think that one of the most toxic parts of some types of Christianity is, no, this is how you need to show up. This is what you need to believe. This is how you need to behave. This is, these are the lists of sins. And if you've done those, boy, like you now have shame. There's this, just to get through the door, there's so much placed upon you. Whereas I think the best role of the church is to share the weight of life that we all have, and not add more shame, add more rules, add more judgment. And it's hard, like, without going and suggesting specific churches to people. It's like, I don't always feel safe saying, have you considered church as an option for creating these types of connections that you are desiring in your life? So maybe the article needs to look like, how do you evaluate a church? I mean, maybe that's what the article needs to be, is here's how you can get a clue about what kind of church you are looking for and how to tell what kind of church one is. Because I think that's honestly the biggest hurdle. And I think if you can overcome that hurdle, the church itself is usually pretty great. like it's pretty great. I usually don't feel like there's a lot of, once someone is in and they can start to feel a sense of trust, I think it goes pretty well. But it's figuring out how to let people know that there are churches that can do this for you, and that will welcome you in no matter how you're showing up at the door. And so I don't know, did that answer your question? I'm fumbling through it and coming up with it as I'm saying it out loud, but that was my initial fumble.
What I think I'm hearing is that it's just far more complicated than one sentence or one article.
Yeah, well, that's why I don't say it. Because it's like, it is very complicated.
Rachel, what you did for me in what you shared at that meeting was really revolutionized, or maybe recover perhaps, a view of what evangelism is. We oftentimes think of evangelism as being bringing people to Christ
Right.
instead of bringing Christ to people, and being Christ for people. And if evangelism genuinely is good news, here are people who are looking for connection. Here are people who are looking for meaning. Here are people who are looking for relationship. And no, we're not going to go out and force ourselves upon somebody else to say, I'm the relationship with you. But as Matt, you were talking about, it's not just going out and finding somebody who's different from you, but within your cohorts, within your communities, where there are people, is not saying, hey, I'm doing this because I'm a Christian, but let it flow naturally. Be who you are. And if there is good news, and saying, hey, you're looking at me like you're down. You're looking at me like there's lonely. Is there something that I can do? Is there a connection I can make? Then we're actually being the church,
Yeah.
and we're taking church there rather than saying you got to come here to get this community. If we build those relationships, I think it'll follow that people will want to say, where do you get that?
But I was gonna bring up, George. I appreciate you talking about evangelism from this place of bringing people to Jesus, or bringing Jesus to people. I'm just struck by like all of the stories of the Gospels where people are, it's both. Sometimes people are dropped through the roof to Jesus.
Mhm.
Sometimes Jesus, come, please help. But the reason behind it is almost always healing. It's not belief. It's not. Uh, it's, or in the case of the woman of the well, let me show you the man who knew everything about me. It's vulnerability. It's healing. It's connection. It's help. And like, what if that is evangelism, right? What if it is healing and vulnerability, and vulnerably connecting over this common seeking of ultimate reality of the divine of God?
I think I I would very much support a shift in evangelism that does prioritize that, as like, even George, when you were saying, bring Christ, how did you phrase it? You said not bring people to the church, but bring the church to the people, or be the church to the people. The last one is the one that I resonated the most, is that, and the one that I think um, is the most powerful, where the intent is not, oh, you're young, please attend my church, but it's, I see you. Like, I see you as a person, and I am willing to show up for you, even though I don't really know everything about you, even though you are a mess right now, and I have a lot of my own stuff going on. But I can set that aside and be a connection for you in this crazy, messed up world. And that can be evangelism. That can be, in its like entirety, is that I was able to show up. I was able to be a disciple in this moment. And that, as we talk about cynicism and the distrust and trauma from structures, I think that kind of work, where it's just, hey, listen, you don't owe me anything. I'm not trying to hook you. I'm not trying to, bring down the average age at my church. I really just want to sit with you right now in this shared experience, and allow that to be enough.
We have this gift, we have this ability, and we have the ability that it's our call to do this as believers, not just called as clergy, but called as believers to make these spaces where, and we have the authority to do that, to be able to provide for that. And sometimes, even if it's not, witnessing ourselves, it's finding ways of making spaces for people to connect. One of my favorite things to do as a pastor is not to be the one who is ministering to, but to find someone who has resources and find someone who has need and connect that. There are find two people who are struggling with the same thing and help them connect with one another. And Matt, what you're talking about wanting to do is to be able to provide these mentors who are 10 years older than the 35-year-olds there and connect that there. And it's a blessing for both because, you know, there is this need we have as we get older to pass on what we know. And mentoring is a two-way thing. It provides something for the mentor as well, to be able to share what they have learned and to check out and certainly to learn new things as well. So I think that we have this ability, just as human beings, to be able to do that. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and sharing of yourself with us. And Matt, any final words that you have?
I also wanted to say thank you. This was an awesome experience for me to hear about how you've been working on this kind of secularly.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I love spending time thinking about how my like church world and professional world intersect. Like that's an area that I don't necessarily spend a lot of time really thinking about, but it's kind of nice for me to reflect on the fact that there is certainly overlap and influence in, I think, ways that I don't always even recognize or acknowledge. And so it's nice to take a moment and reflect on that. And I think that we are all doing similar work and doing our best to create safe spaces for our fellow humans. And I think that's pretty cool.
Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time at Upside Down.